Jasmine Washington watches in horror as her daughter's seizure medication shatters against the airplane floor. The white flight attendant, Heather, smirks. Unmarked bottles aren't allowed. 20 minutes later, all passengers are deplaning. Nobody suspected a pediatric neurosurgeon could halt an entire Boeing 737 with a single phone call. Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination and a father's powerful response, tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe in standing up against injustice. Now let's uncover how one flight attendant's actions sparked a nationwide conversation about medical rights and racial bias in the sky. The Washington family had been planning this trip for months. Dr. Malcolm Washington, a 42-year-old pediatric neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, was traveling to San Francisco to receive the prestigious Harrison Award for Medical Innovation. His groundbreaking techniques for minimally invasive brain surgery in children had saved countless lives and revolutionized the field. Beside him stood his wife Tanya, 39, a sharp-minded corporate attorney whose meticulous attention to detail had made her one of the most respected legal minds at her firm. Together they made a power couple, the kind whose academic achievements and professional success should have insulated them from the prejudices that plagued everyday interactions for many Black Americans. Between them stood their daughter Zoe, an 8-year-old with curious brown eyes and a passion for science that mirrored her father's. 3 years earlier, Zoe had been diagnosed with epilepsy after experiencing her first grand mal seizure during a school field trip. The diagnosis had changed everything for the Washington family, introducing a regimen of daily medications, emergency protocols, and the constant vigilance that comes with managing a child's chronic condition. "Daddy, will we see the Golden Gate Bridge today?" Zoe asked, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a worn purple rabbit named Hopscotch that went everywhere with her. She bounced on her toes, excitement temporarily overshadowing the morning's medication routine. "Not today, sweetheart," Malcolm replied, carefully measuring liquid from an amber bottle into a small medicine cup. "We'll land around dinner time, get settled at the hotel, and tomorrow we'll see everything San Francisco has to offer." Tanya looked up from her phone where she'd been checking their boarding passes. "I've already mapped out the perfect spot to see the bridge. The weather forecast says clear skies all weekend." Their preparation for travel had been extensive. Malcolm had contacted the airline 3 weeks in advance to inform them of Zoe's medical condition. Tanya had organized a folder containing all relevant medical documentation. Zoe's diagnosis, her treatment plan signed by her neurologist, the prescription information for her medications, and a letter explaining the necessity of keeping certain emergency medications on her person at all times. The Washingtons had arrived at Baltimore Washington International Airport 3 hours early, allowing extra time for security screenings and any questions about Zoe's medications. TSA agents had carefully inspected the medications but allowed them through without issue after reviewing the documentation. As a family who had experienced their share of extra, random, screenings, prolonged questioning, and subtle suspicions, they had learned to anticipate friction at checkpoints of authority. Malcolm had dressed in a tailored navy suit, his Johns Hopkins ID badge visible on his breast pocket, a subconscious armor against bias. Tanya wore a conservative pencil skirt and blazer, her natural hair in a sleek, professional bun. They had dressed Zoe in her private school uniform, another subtle signal of their social standing. "Pre-boarding for families with small children and passengers requiring special assistance," announced the gate attendant. The Washington family approached the gate, boarding passes and documentation ready. "We have priority boarding," Tanya explained, presenting their first-class tickets and Zoe's medical information. "Our daughter requires special accommodation." The gate agent's eyes flickered briefly between their faces and their tickets, a momentary calculation that Malcolm had witnessed countless times before. "I'll need to verify this medical documentation," the agent said, disappearing with their folder for several minutes while other priority passengers began boarding. Malcolm felt Tanya's hand squeeze his arm, a silent reminder to remain calm. Zoe, oblivious to the subtle tension, chatted about the in-flight movie she hoped to watch. When the agent finally returned and allowed them to board, Malcolm noted they were the only priority passenger subjected to this additional verification step. He logged the incident mentally but said nothing, choosing his battles carefully as he always did. On board, a flight attendant named Ryan greeted them warmly, helping them settle into their first-class seats and stowing their carry-on luggage. "Is there anything special you need for your flight today?" Ryan asked, his smile genuine. Malcolm began explaining Zoe's condition and medication schedule when another flight attendant approached. Her name tag read, Heather Brooks, Senior Flight Attendant. "Is there a problem here?" Heather asked, her tone suggesting there might indeed be one. "No problem at all," Malcolm replied. "I was just explaining that my daughter has a medical condition, and we may need to administer medication during the flight." Heather's eyes narrowed as she took the medical documentation Malcolm offered. "This seems complicated. I'll have to review this more thoroughly before takeoff." As Heather walked away with their medical paperwork, Tanya and Malcolm exchanged glances. They had encountered this type of scrutiny before, but usually it dissolved once their credentials and documentation were recognized. Still, there was something in Heather's demeanor that left Malcolm uneasy as he helped Zoe buckle her seatbelt and get settled for the 6-hour flight. "Daddy, can I have my medicine now?" Zoe asked, right on schedule for her pre-flight dose, a preventative measure her neurologist had recommended to reduce the risk of seizures during the stress of air travel. "Of course, sunshine," Malcolm said, reaching for the carry-on bag containing her medications, trying to ignore the crawling sensation that they were being watched more closely than the other passengers settling into their first-class seats. The Washingtons had just settled into their spacious first-class seats. Malcolm carefully administered Zoe's pre-flight medication, a ritual they had perfected over the years. Zoe swallowed it without complaint, having long ago adjusted to the rhythm of her treatment. Tanya tucked Hopscotch the purple rabbit beside Zoe and helped her select a movie on the in-flight entertainment system. "All set, Princess?" Malcolm asked, storing the medication bottle in the specialized case they kept it in. Zoe nodded, already absorbed in the animated film flickering across her screen. For a brief moment, they were just a normal family beginning their vacation. That moment shattered when Heather Brooks returned, standing imperiously in the aisle beside their row. "I need to inspect all liquids you've brought on board," she announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Malcolm blinked, confused. "We've already cleared security and had our medications verified at the gate." "Airline policy," Heather replied curtly. "All liquids must be inspected by cabin crew before takeoff." Tanya, ever the attorney, immediately recognized the falsehood. "That's not standard airline policy. We've flown dozens of times with our daughter's medication without this requirement." Several passengers were now watching the interaction. Malcolm kept his voice deliberately calm and quiet. "Our daughter has epilepsy. This medication is necessary for her safety during flight. We have complete documentation, which your colleague took for review." "Yes, I've seen your paperwork," Heather said dismissively. "But I need to physically inspect all liquid medications." Ryan, the friendly flight attendant who had greeted them earlier, approached cautiously. "Heather, I can verify that they showed proper medical documentation. FAA regulations allow." "I'm the senior flight attendant," Heather cut him off sharply. "I know the regulations. All medications must be properly labeled with prescription information or they cannot be permitted in the cabin." Malcolm felt his heart rate increasing but maintained his professional demeanor. "The medication is in its original amber bottle, which is standard pharmaceutical practice. The prescription information is in our documentation, which you have. This is completely in compliance with TSA and FAA regulations." "I don't see a pharmacy label on this bottle," Heather insisted, pointing to the specialized case where Malcolm had just stored the medication. "Because it's a liquid suspension that must be kept in a temperature-controlled container," Tanya explained, her legal training evident in her precise, measured tone. "The prescription information is included in our documentation, along with a letter from her neurologist explaining this exact situation." By now, Zoe had removed her headphones and was watching the confrontation with growing anxiety. Malcolm noticed her hands beginning to fidget with Hopscotch's ears, a warning sign of her rising stress levels. "It's okay, Zoe," he reassured her, though he could feel the situation spiraling out of control. A middle-aged white woman across the aisle leaned forward. "I'm a nurse, and what this family is saying is correct. Many pediatric medications come in precisely that type of container." Heather barely acknowledged the woman's comment. "Without a clear pharmacy label, I can't allow unlabeled liquids on this flight. It's a security issue." Malcolm took a deep breath. "This is a medically necessary exception covered under the Air Carrier Access Act. You are legally required to accommodate my daughter's documented medical needs." "Don't tell me what I'm required to do," Heather snapped, her professional veneer cracking. "Either show me a properly labeled prescription bottle, or the medication can't stay in the cabin." Zoe's breathing had quickened, her small hand clutching Tanya's arm. Malcolm recognized the warning signs immediately. The increased anxiety was a potential seizure trigger. "This is ridiculous," Tanya said. "We've complied with every regulation. We contacted the airline weeks in advance. We've provided all required documentation. There is absolutely no justification for this harassment." The confrontation had now drawn the attention of most first-class passengers. An older white man in a business suit loudly sighed. "Just follow the rules so we can take off," he muttered. Malcolm ignored him, focusing instead on Heather. "My daughter needs this medication. It prevents seizures, which could be triggered by the stress you are currently causing. As a medical professional, I am telling you this is necessary for her safety during flight. And as the senior flight attendant responsible for cabin security, I'm telling you that unlabeled medicines are not permitted," Heather countered, reaching toward the specialized case. "Do not touch that," Malcolm said firmly, his voice dropping an octave. "That medication is our property and medically necessary for our daughter." Zoe, increasingly distressed by the confrontation, reached for the medicine case herself, perhaps intending to show Heather the bottle inside as if that might resolve the situation. As she opened the case, Heather lunged forward and snatched the amber bottle from the child's small hands. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." "Unmarked container," Heather declared triumphantly, holding up the bottle. "Give that back immediately," Malcolm demanded, rising from his seat. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when passengers recounted the incident, their stories varied slightly. Heather, perhaps startled by Malcolm's movement or perhaps deliberately, released her grip on the bottle. The amber glass shattered against the airplane floor, the critical medication spreading in a small puddle at their feet. Absolute silence fell over the first-class cabin. Zoe began to cry quietly, the trauma of watching her essential medicine destroyed overwhelming her. Tanya pulled her daughter close, whispering reassurances while staring daggers at the flight attendant. Malcolm stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable to most observers. But those who knew him well would have recognized the controlled fury in his eyes, the slight flare of his nostrils, the nearly imperceptible tightening of his jaw. "You have just destroyed essential seizure medication prescribed to an 8-year-old epileptic child," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "A medication that we are legally permitted to carry, that was cleared by TSA, verified at the gate, and documented in paperwork that you yourself reviewed." Heather took a small step back, perhaps finally realizing the gravity of her actions. "I was just following protocol," she said defensively, but with less certainty than before. A passenger had already begun recording the confrontation on his phone. Another was frantically pressing the call button for another flight attendant. Malcolm's voice remained eerily calm as he said, "I need to speak with the captain immediately. This flight cannot safely proceed." "Mommy, I'm scared," Zoe whispered, her small body trembling against Tanya's side. Her lower lip quivered as she stared at the destroyed medication seeping into the airplane carpet. Tanya held her tighter, recognizing the warning signs that preceded Zoe's seizures, the rapid blinking, the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, the increasing disorientation. "It's going to be okay, baby," Tanya assured her, though uncertainty edged her voice. She reached into their emergency bag, searching for their backup medication, only to remember they had packed it in their checked luggage after TSA had assured them the carry-on medication would be sufficient. Malcolm knelt beside the puddle of wasted medicine, the glass shards reflecting the overhead cabin lights. His medical training took over as he compartmentalized his fury to address the immediate crisis. "Zoe needs her medication within the next 40 minutes, or we risk triggering a seizure," he stated, his voice carrying the authority of thousands of surgeries and life-or-death decisions. Heather stood frozen, her earlier confidence visibly shaken. I didn't know it would break," she stammered. "You knew exactly what you were doing," snapped the nurse from across the aisle, who had now unbuckled her seatbelt and moved to offer assistance. "That was completely unnecessary and potentially dangerous." Ryan, the other flight attendant, hurried back down the aisle. "What happened?" "Oh my God," he gasped, seeing the broken glass and medication. He immediately grabbed paper towels from the galley. "This isn't about paper towels," Malcolm said. "My daughter is epileptic, and your colleague just destroyed her seizure medication. This is now a medical emergency situation." Throughout the cabin, reactions varied dramatically. Several passengers were openly recording the incident on their phones. A young white couple whispered to each other, throwing sympathetic glances toward Zoe. The businessman who had earlier complained loudly announced, "They should have just complied with the rules. We're going to be late now." A black woman sitting 2 rows back stood up. "Complied with what rules exactly?" "They had documentation. They had approval. What rule justifies destroying a child's medicine?" The confrontation was spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Heather retreated toward the galley, speaking urgently into her handheld radio. "I need the captain or first officer in first class immediately. We have a situation." Malcolm turned his complete attention to Zoe, whose symptoms were progressing. "Deep breaths, sunshine. Remember our counting game?" He began counting slowly, a technique they had developed to help Zoe regulate her breathing during anxiety attacks, which often preceded seizures. Tanya, meanwhile, had switched to crisis management mode. "We need replacement medication immediately. Either this plane needs to return to the gate, or someone needs to bring medication to us right now." The co-pilot appeared from the cockpit, his expression concerned but professional. "What seems to be the problem here?" Before Malcolm could answer, memories flashed through his mind, being followed by security in the doctor's lounge during his first week as an attending physician, patients requesting "the real doctor" when he entered their rooms, being stopped by hospital security when working late in his own office. Each time, he had remained calm, proved his credentials, moved forward professionally. But this was different. This was his daughter. "The problem," Malcolm said, standing to his full height, "is that your senior flight attendant just deliberately destroyed vital seizure medication belonging to my epileptic daughter, putting her at immediate medical risk." The co-pilot's eyes widened as he assessed the situation. "Sir, I am Dr. Malcolm Washington, Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital. My daughter has been diagnosed with epilepsy for 3 years. We have completed all required documentation, which your staff has already reviewed. Your flight attendant," he pointed to Heather without looking at her, "decided that our documentation was insufficient and took it upon herself to confiscate and destroy federally protected medical equipment." Passengers throughout the first-class cabin were now completely engaged in the unfolding drama. Some were openly supportive of the Washington family, while others seemed annoyed by the delay. "Can't they just give her some Tylenol or something?" a voice muttered from the back of the cabin. Tanya whirled around. "Epilepsy medication is not interchangeable with over-the-counter pain relievers. My daughter needs her specific, prescribed medication to prevent grand mal seizures that could cause brain damage or worse." The co-pilot held up his hands. "Let's all try to calm down. I'm sure we can find a solution." "The solution," Malcolm interrupted, "is straightforward. Either this airline provides replacement emergency medication for my daughter within the next 30 minutes, or this flight cannot safely proceed with her on board. And since we will not be leaving her behind, that means this entire aircraft is now grounded until this medical emergency is resolved. Sir, we can't just turn back to the gate for one passenger's issue, the co-pilot explained apologetically. Malcolm's expression remained impassive. This isn't one passenger's issue. This is a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, destruction of private medical property, endangerment of a minor, and potentially gross negligence. Your airline was informed of my daughter's condition weeks ago. We followed every protocol. Your staff member, he nodded toward Heather, who had retreated to the galley, made a unilateral decision that has created a legitimate medical emergency. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Zoe's condition was visibly deteriorating as her anxiety increased, her small hands now trembling noticeably. I need to speak with the captain, Malcolm insisted. Now. He's completing pre-flight checks, the co-pilot explained. I can relay. This isn't a message to be relayed, Tanya interjected. This is a time-sensitive medical and legal emergency that requires immediate intervention from the highest authority on this aircraft. Ryan, who had been quietly monitoring the situation, stepped forward. I can confirm that the family provided complete documentation, which was verified at the gate. The medication should never have been questioned once they boarded. The co-pilot looked increasingly uncomfortable. Let me speak with the captain and see what we can do. As he retreated toward the cockpit, Malcolm turned his full attention back to Zoe, whose eyelids had begun to flutter in a way that sent ice through his veins. The warning signs were escalating. We don't have much time, he said quietly to Tanya. I'm calling Johns Hopkins. Malcolm's fingers moved swiftly across his phone screen, muscle memory dialing the direct line to Johns Hopkins Hospital's neurology department. Around him, the first-class cabin had become a theater of tension, all eyes on the unfolding drama. This is Dr. Malcolm Washington. I need to speak with Dr. Eleanor Chin immediately, he said into the phone, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a surgeon accustomed to life-and-death situations. It's regarding my daughter Zoe's medication. Yes, it's an emergency. While waiting to be connected, Malcolm kept one hand on Zoe's shoulder, monitoring her condition with the practiced eye of both a father and a physician. Her symptoms hadn't progressed to a full seizure yet, but the window for prevention was rapidly closing. Eleanor, thank you for taking my call, Malcolm said when the connection went through. We have a situation. He rapidly explained what had happened, his words precise and clinical despite the emotion churning beneath them. Dr. Chen's voice came through clearly enough that Tanya could hear her response. That's outrageous, Malcolm. Let me connect you with Dr. Ramirez in aviation medicine. He's on the FAA Medical Advisory Committee with you. The captain finally emerged from the cockpit, his expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. I understand we have a situation here, he began. Malcolm held up one finger, signaling for the captain to wait while he continued his call. The small gesture, a black passenger prioritizing his conversation over the white captain's entrance, caused visible discomfort among some passengers, while others leaned forward, riveted by this reversal of expected power dynamics. Dr. Ramirez, Malcolm Washington here. I'm currently on Flight 1527 to San Francisco, and we have an urgent situation involving my daughter's epilepsy medication, Malcolm explained, putting the call on speaker so the captain could hear. A flight attendant has destroyed her medication, creating an immediate medical emergency and safety risk. Dr. Washington, Ramirez's authoritative voice filled the space between them. As you know from our committee work, this is a clear violation of FAA regulations regarding accommodations for passengers with medical conditions. Am I correct in understanding that your daughter's medication was properly documented and had cleared security? Absolutely correct. We followed every protocol, Malcolm confirmed. Then this is unacceptable, Ramirez stated firmly. As a sitting member of the FAA Medical Advisory Committee, you have the authority to declare this a medical safety risk under Section 382.23 of the Department of Transportation Regulations. The captain's face registered shock as the implications became clear. Malcolm Washington wasn't just any upset passenger, he was a Federal Aviation Medical Authority. "Captain," Malcolm said, finally addressing the man directly, "I am formally notifying you that this aircraft is now under a medical safety advisory. My daughter's condition poses a risk without proper medication, and your airline's actions have directly created this emergency situation." The captain looked between Malcolm, Tanya, and the trembling Zoe. "Sir, I understand your concern, but grounding an entire flight for—" "This isn't a request," Malcolm interrupted, his voice remaining measured but firm. "This is a formal declaration from a member of the Federal Aviation Administration's Medical Advisory Committee. Your airline destroyed medically necessary, legally protected medication, creating a direct safety risk. Under federal regulations, this flight cannot proceed until this situation is resolved." Tanya, whose legal mind had been working overtime, added, "Additionally, this incident represents a clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Your employee discriminated against our daughter based on her medical condition, despite having reviewed proper documentation. Do you think Malcolm is right to stand his ground here? Comment number 1 if you believe he's justified in using his authority to protect his daughter. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to advocate for yourself or a loved one in the face of discrimination. Have you ever witnessed someone in authority abusing their power like Heather did? What would you have done in Malcolm's position? The incident was rapidly escalating beyond a personal confrontation. Malcolm's phone was now connecting to the FAA emergency line, while Tanya had begun recording the interaction. Heather had retreated to the far end of the galley, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety as she conferred with other crew members. Ryan approached the Washington family, genuine concern on his face. "Dr. Washington, I've contacted airport operations. They're sending a medical team to meet us at the gate," he said quietly. The captain, now fully aware of the severity of the situation, attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical difficulty, we'll be returning to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A collective groan rose from passengers unaware of the full circumstances, while those who had witnessed the confrontation began sharing their recordings with nearby passengers. "Technical difficulty," a woman several rows back said loudly. "That's what they're calling racism these days." Malcolm remained focused on his most critical concern, Zoe's condition. Her symptoms had plateaued but not improved. The timing window for her regular medication was closing, and the stress of the situation only increased the risk of a seizure. "We need to expedite this return to gate," Malcolm informed the captain. "Every minute increases the medical risk." The captain nodded curtly and returned to the cockpit, the gravity of the situation finally registering. Malcolm's phone call with the FAA official continued, "Yes, sir. The medication was clearly labeled in our documentation, which the airline had reviewed and approved prior to boarding. Yes, I believe discrimination was a factor. No, sir, I'm not leaving this aircraft without resolution. Yes, I understand the implications." Throughout the first-class cabin, passengers were taking sides. Some were openly supportive of the Washington family, offering words of encouragement or their own medications, though none appropriate for Zoe's condition. Others muttered about playing the race card and special treatment, loud enough to be heard but not directly confrontational. The most powerful statement came from silence, the black passengers who simply watched with knowing expressions, a shared understanding of yet another everyday injustice magnified to crisis proportions. As the plane began its taxi back to the terminal, the announcement system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience, but all passengers will need to deplane while we address a situation on board. Please gather your belongings and prepare to exit the aircraft in an orderly fashion. Rebooking agents will be available in the terminal." The ripple of shock through the cabin was palpable. An entire Boeing 737, fully boarded and ready for departure, was returning to discharge all passengers. "This is ridiculous," the businessman who had been complaining earlier exclaimed. "I'm missing my connection because of this?" A quiet voice from across the aisle, the nurse who had supported them earlier, responded, "No, sir. You're missing your connection because an airline employee destroyed a child's life-saving medication. Direct your complaints accordingly." Malcolm's phone continued to be his lifeline to resolution. "Yes, Dr. Patel, if you could have the emergency prescription ready. We'll need it brought directly to Gate B17. Yes, the airport director has been notified." As the plane finally docked at the jetway, Malcolm looked at Tanya, a silent communication passing between them. This wasn't just about getting Zoe's medication replaced anymore. This had become something bigger, a moment when they could not, accept the casual discrimination that had nearly endangered their child's life. "They've awakened the wrong parents," Tanya whispered, squeezing Malcolm's hand as airport personnel began boarding the plane. The scene inside Terminal B erupted into controlled chaos as passengers from Flight 1527 streamed back into the gate area, a mixture of confusion and frustration marking their faces. Gate agents frantically typed at their computers while supervisors huddled in urgent conversation, occasionally glancing toward the jetway where the Washington family had yet to emerge. "What the hell is going on?" demanded a red-faced businessman, slamming his briefcase on the counter. "I've got a meeting in San Francisco in 4 hours. Sir, we're working to resolve a situation and get everyone rebooked as quickly as possible," explained a harried gate agent, her professional smile strained to breaking point. Inside the jet bridge, Malcolm and Tanya Washington walked slowly, supporting Zoe between them. The girl's condition had stabilized but remained precarious, her usual vibrance dimmed by the stress and medical uncertainty. Behind them trailed a procession that resembled a small parade, the captain, looking grim, 2 airline supervisors who had boarded immediately upon return to gate, Ryan, the sympathetic flight attendant, and conspicuously absent, Heather Brooks, who had been quickly whisked away through the rear aircraft door. As they emerged into the terminal, they were immediately approached by the airport's medical response team. "Dr. Washington. I'm Dr. Patel from University of Maryland Medical Center. We spoke on the phone," said a woman in a white coat, extending her hand. "We have the emergency medication ready." The efficiency of Malcolm's medical connections had produced results with remarkable speed. Within minutes, Zoe received her replacement medication, administered under Dr. Patel's supervision while Tanya maintained a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. "How long until she stabilizes?" asked one of the airline supervisors, a tall man whose name badge identified him as Gregory Phillips, customer service director. "Approximately 20 minutes for the medication to take full effect," Malcolm answered, his attention fixed on Zoe's pupils, checking her neurological responses with practiced precision. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington, on behalf of Atlas Airlines, I want to express our deepest apologies for this incident," Phillips began, his voice lowered to avoid the attention of nearby passengers, many of whom were already recording the scene on their phones. "We would like to offer you complimentary first-class upgrades on the next available flight, along with meal vouchers for your inconvenience." Tanya's expression hardened, the attorney in her rising to the surface. "Mr. Phillips, what occurred today goes well beyond an inconvenience that can be remedied with meal vouchers. Your employee deliberately destroyed critical medication after reviewing our complete documentation. She created a potentially life-threatening medical emergency for our daughter. This is a matter of disability discrimination, possible racial bias, and gross negligence." Phillips blanched. "I assure you, Atlas Airlines does not condone discrimination of any kind." "Yet it happened," Malcolm interjected calmly, still monitoring Zoe. "On your aircraft, under your procedures, with your trained staff." A new figure approached, a woman in her 50s wearing an impeccably tailored suit, her Atlas Airlines executive badge prominently displayed. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington, I'm Shannon Peters, Chief Customer Officer for Atlas. May we speak somewhere more private?" Malcolm exchanged glances with Tanya. "My daughter needs to rest in a calm environment while her medication takes effect." "Of course. Please follow me to our premium lounge. It's quiet there, and we can ensure Zoe's comfort while we discuss next steps." As they were escorted through the terminal, the disruption had begun to spread beyond their immediate gate. Social media was already lighting up with passenger videos showing the confrontation aboard the aircraft. Hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #MedicineMoment were trending as the incident captured the public imagination, a perfect storm of medical negligence, potential discrimination, and the satisfying David versus Goliath narrative of a powerful airline brought to heel by one determined family. Inside the plush confines of the Atlas Premium Lounge, Zoe was settled onto a comfortable sofa, her color gradually improving as the medication took effect. Tanya sat beside her, Hopscotch the purple rabbit tucked protectively between them, while Malcolm faced Shannon Peters across a low coffee table. "Dr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for your family's experience today," Peters began, her tone sincere. "This falls far below our standards of customer care, particularly for passengers with medical needs." "Ms. Peters," Malcolm replied, his voice level but resonant with controlled anger, "what happened today was not a service failure. It was a dangerous and potentially life-threatening incident of discrimination. Your employee looked at my black family, decided our medical documentation was insufficient despite all evidence to the contrary, and took actions that directly endangered my daughter's health." Peters flinched slightly but maintained her professional composure. "We take these allegations extremely seriously, Dr. Washington. Flight attendant Brooks has been removed from service pending a full investigation. We would like to offer you compensation for—" "We're not interested in compensation," Tanya interrupted, her legal training evident in her precise tone. "We're interested in accountability and systemic change. As we speak, I'm documenting every aspect of this incident for what may become a significant legal action against your airline." Peters' carefully maintained expression flickered with genuine alarm. "I hope we can find a resolution that doesn't require litigation. What would you consider an appropriate response from Atlas?" Before either Washington could answer, Tanya's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her eyebrows rose slightly. "It appears the videos from the flight have already gone viral. 3 different passenger recordings are trending on Twitter and Instagram." Peters paled visibly. "May I ask what you're looking for as a resolution?" Malcolm leaned forward, his surgeon's hands clasped before him. "Ms. Peters, I've spent my career saving children's lives. When I enter the operating room, I can't allow biases or assumptions to influence my decisions. Lives depend on my objectivity and adherence to protocols. Your airline failed at the most basic level today. Your employee allowed her biases to override both protocol and human decency." He paused, ensuring his words registered fully. "What we want is a complete overhaul of how your airline trains staff to handle passengers with medical conditions, particularly those from minority backgrounds. We want transparency about the investigation and appropriate consequences for the discrimination my family experienced. And we want a formal, public commitment to improving your policies." In another corner of the airport, a different conversation was unfolding. A black family who had been seated several rows behind the Washingtons approached them as they waited for a beverage. "Dr. Washington. I'm Robert Jackson. My wife Keisha and I were on your flight," the man said, extending his hand. "We wanted to say we support you completely. What happened to your daughter was wrong on every level." Keisha Jackson nodded emphatically. "Our son has severe allergies, and we've faced similar scrutiny when traveling with his EpiPens. It's exhausting having to constantly prove that our medical needs are legitimate." Malcolm shook Robert's hand firmly. "Thank you. It means a lot to know we're not alone in this experience." "You're not alone at all," Keisha assured him. "When that flight attendant destroyed your daughter's medication, she wasn't just attacking your family, she was reinforcing a pattern that affects all of us who have to navigate these spaces while black." Their conversation was interrupted when a young white doctor approached, introducing himself as Dr. Lucas Bennett from Stanford Children's Hospital. "Dr. Washington, I was in business class and witnessed what happened. I've already provided my contact information to your wife as a witness. What that flight attendant did was unconscionable, and I'd be willing to testify to that effect if needed." The gathering of supporters continued to grow as word spread through the terminal about what had transpired. What had begun as one family's traumatic travel experience was rapidly transforming into something larger. A rallying point for conversations about medical discrimination, racial bias in customer service, and the exhausting reality of navigating public spaces as a black professional family. Back in the premium lounge, as Zoe's condition stabilized and her bright personality began to re-emerge, Malcolm and Tanya faced a difficult decision. They could accept the airline's offers of compensation and special treatment to continue their journey, or they could stand firm in their demands for substantive change. "What do you think, Dr. Washington?" Shannon Peters asked, after laying out an enhanced compensation package that included first-class upgrades, airline vouchers, and hotel accommodations in San Francisco. Malcolm looked at Tanya, then at Zoe, who was now coloring quietly beside them, seemingly recovered from her ordeal. "Ms. Peters, your offer addresses our inconvenience, but not the fundamental wrong that occurred today. We're not interested in special treatment, we're interested in equal treatment, consistently applied regardless of what we look like or where we come from." Tanya nodded in agreement. "We won't be continuing our journey on Atlas Airlines today. Instead, we'll be working with our attorneys to ensure this incident leads to real, verifiable changes in how your airline operates." Shannon Peters recognized the resolution in their eyes and nodded slowly. "I understand. For what it's worth, I believe changes are necessary. I'll be taking your concerns directly to our CEO." As she departed, Tanya turned to Malcolm. "Are we doing the right thing? You've worked so hard for this award ceremony." Malcolm looked at his daughter, now safely past the danger point thanks to the replacement medication. "There will be other awards, Tanya. But Zoe needed to see us stand up today, not just for her, but for everyone who might find themselves in our position without the privileges and platform we have." Outside the lounge windows, they could see the continued chaos at the gate as passengers demanded answers and rebookings. What had begun as one family's fight for fair treatment had ground an entire aircraft to a halt, demonstrating powerfully how systems of discrimination, when finally confronted, revealed their true fragility. 3 hours after the incident, the Washington family sat in a private conference room at a nearby airport hotel. Zoe had fully stabilized, her medication working effectively, though the emotional toll of the day showed in her unusual quietness as she played a game on Tanya's tablet. Malcolm gazed out the window at planes taking off and landing, each one a reminder of their interrupted journey and the unexpected turn their family vacation had taken. "I keep thinking about the first time," Malcolm said quietly to Tanya, his mind drifting back to the day that had changed everything for their family. 3 years earlier, Malcolm had been in surgery when he received the call that Zoe had collapsed during a school field trip to the Baltimore Aquarium. He had scrubbed out immediately, leaving his resident to close while he raced across town, still wearing his surgical scrubs beneath his coat. The image of his vibrant, curious 5-year-old daughter connected to monitoring equipment, her small body racked by seizures, had permanently etched itself into his memory. The diagnosis of epilepsy had come quickly, but the adjustment had been anything but simple. Malcolm and Tanya had learned everything they could about the condition, consulted with the top neurologists in the country, and completely reorganized their lives around Zoe's care. Medicine schedules, emergency protocols, school accommodations, activity modifications, epilepsy touched every aspect of their existence. "Remember what Dr. Williams told us after her diagnosis?" Tanya asked, reaching for his hand. Malcolm nodded. Dr. Amara Williams, a black neurologist they had specifically sought out, had given them advice that went beyond medical treatment. She said that Zoe would face 3 battles: the seizures themselves, the world's misunderstanding of her condition, and the additional scrutiny she'd face as a black child with a medical issue. "And she was right," Tanya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Remember the school nurse who insisted on calling us every time Zoe needed her regular medication? Or the swim instructor who wouldn't let her in the pool despite her neurologist's clearance? Or the birthday party parent who asked us to stay, just in case, when we dropped her off?" Each incident had been a paper cut to their dignity, small, individually manageable, but cumulatively exhausting. They had developed strategies. Malcolm wore his hospital ID often, they carried multiple copies of medical documentation, they arrived early to activities to allow time for the inevitable questions and concerns. "We've been so careful," Malcolm said, frustration evident in his voice. We contacted the airline in advance. We brought all the documentation. We followed every rule. And still it wasn't enough, Tanya finished his thought. Because it's never just about following the rules, is it? Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Robert and Keisha Jackson, the couple who had approached them earlier in the terminal. "We hope we're not intruding," Keisha said hesitantly. "We just wanted to check on Zoe and see if you needed anything." Malcolm welcomed them in, grateful for the solidarity. As they settled into chairs around the conference table, Robert shared their own experiences traveling with their son's severe allergy medication. Last summer in Denver, a TSA agent insisted on opening every single EpiPen to verify the contents, Robert recounted, shaking his head. "When I explained that would render them unusable, which could be fatal for my son in an emergency, he called his supervisor and had us pulled aside for additional screening." "Did you file a complaint?" Tanya asked, her attorney mind automatically calculating the legal implications. "We tried," Keisha replied with a weary smile. "But we were catching a connecting flight with barely 30 minutes to spare. Fighting the system means missing connections, ruining reservations, disrupting carefully planned trips. They count on that, they count on it being more inconvenient to challenge them than to absorb the indignity and move on." Malcolm nodded in understanding. This was the calculus that minorities made daily, determining whether an incident of bias was worth the additional energy, time, and potential escalation that came with confronting it. The conversation was interrupted again when Malcolm's phone rang, a colleague from Johns Hopkins. "Malcolm, I just saw what happened. It's all over Twitter," Dr. Raymond Chen said. "Are you and Zoe okay?" "We're stable," Malcolm replied, automatically using medical terminology. "Zoe's responding well to the replacement medication, but we've had to cancel our San Francisco trip." "Listen, I'm not just calling to check on you," Dr. Chen continued. "I've been talking with some colleagues in the Physicians for Patient Rights group. What happened to your family isn't isolated. We've been collecting data on disparities in how Black patients are treated in travel and medical contexts. Your incident is textbook, documented medical need, proper paperwork, professional credentials, and still facing discriminatory treatment." As Dr. Chen shared statistics about the disproportionate questioning of Black travelers with medical accommodations, Malcolm felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. The burden of not just experiencing discrimination but being expected to educate others about it, to prove its existence, to quantify its impact. Across the room, Zoe had put down the tablet and was listening to the adults' conversation with unusual attention. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "was it my fault the plane couldn't go?" The question pierced Malcolm like a scalpel. He crossed to his daughter immediately, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Zoe Washington, listen to me very carefully. None of this was your fault. You did absolutely nothing wrong. But if I didn't need medicine—" "No," Tanya interrupted firmly, joining them. "Needing medicine is not wrong. Being sick is not wrong. You have a medical condition that requires treatment, just like some people need glasses to see or insulin for diabetes. The problem wasn't your medicine, sweetheart," Malcolm continued, choosing his words carefully. "The problem was that someone didn't listen when we explained about your medicine, even though we had all the right paperwork. And that was their mistake, not yours." Zoe considered this, her young mind processing complex realities that no 8-year-old should have to understand. "Was it because we're Black?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air, devastating in its simplicity and insight. Malcolm and Tanya exchanged glances, having practiced these difficult conversations but never feeling fully prepared. "We don't know for certain what was in that flight attendant's heart," Tanya began carefully. "But sometimes people make unfair assumptions based on how others look. What matters is that we know the truth about who we are and what we deserve. And what we deserve is to be treated with respect and to have our medical needs taken seriously," Malcolm added. "That's why we're staying to make sure this gets fixed, instead of just trying to catch another flight." Zoe nodded, processing this information. Like when you fixed Joey Miller's brain so he could play soccer again. Malcolm smiled, touched by his daughter's connection to his work. Similar, yes. Sometimes fixing bigger problems takes more time than fixing one person's brain. Another knock at the door revealed Dr. Lucas Bennett, the Stanford physician who had witnessed the incident. "I've just come from speaking with the airline representatives," he reported. "Several other medical professionals from the flight have provided statements supporting your account." "Thank you, Dr. Bennett," Malcolm said, genuinely appreciative of the allyship. "It's the least I could do," Bennett replied. "As healthcare providers, we all have an obligation to speak up against medical discrimination. And frankly, I was appalled by how quickly your family's legitimate medical needs were dismissed despite your credentials. The unspoken reality hung in the air: would a white doctor's family have faced the same scrutiny? Would their documentation have been questioned so aggressively? Would their word have been doubted?" As the afternoon wore on, more passengers from the flight stopped by to offer support or share their own stories. What emerged was a tapestry of experiences reflecting a troubling pattern: people of color, disabled travelers, non-English speakers, and other marginalized groups consistently facing heightened scrutiny, questioning, and obstacles while navigating spaces designed for the convenience of the majority. For Malcolm and Tanya, a difficult decision was crystallizing. They could accept the airline's increasingly generous offers of compensation and continue with their lives, or they could use their position, credentials, and the public attention this incident had garnered to push for more meaningful change. "Zoe," Malcolm said, turning to his daughter. "I know you were really excited about seeing the Golden Gate Bridge." "It's okay, Daddy," she replied with unexpected maturity. "We can see it next time." "That's right," Tanya agreed, stroking her daughter's hair. "And when we do, things might be a little better for kids like you because of what happened today." Malcolm's phone buzzed with another notification. The incident had now been picked up by major news outlets. What had begun as a personal confrontation was rapidly becoming a national conversation about race, medicine, and authority in American life. "We're not letting this go," Malcolm said quietly to Tanya, his resolution firm. "Not just for Zoe, but for everyone who doesn't have an MD after their name or a legal team at their disposal." Tanya squeezed his hand in agreement, both of them acutely aware that their fight for dignity was one that countless others waged daily, without cameras, hashtags, or public support. The Atlas Airlines corporate headquarters in Dallas hummed with unusual activity for a Saturday evening. Emergency meetings had been convened, public relations specialists had been called in, and legal advisors huddled in conference rooms reviewing potential liability. The viral videos of the incident, now viewed millions of times across multiple platforms, played on screens throughout the building as executives attempted to understand how a routine pre-flight interaction had escalated into a full-blown corporate crisis. In the CEO's corner office, Bradley Thompson paced behind his mahogany desk, his typically confident demeanor replaced by barely contained anxiety. At 62, Thompson had navigated numerous corporate challenges during his 30-year aviation career: financial downturns, labor disputes, even a minor crash landing without casualties, but the rapidly escalating public relations disaster unfolding on social media presented a uniquely modern threat. The latest numbers, he demanded of Michaela Reeves, Atlas's chief communications officer, who sat across from him reviewing real-time analytics. "It's not good," Reeves replied grimly. "Over 12 million views across platforms. The hashtag medicine moment is trending nationally. We've received inquiries from every major news outlet. The stock is already down 3 points in after-hours trading, and Asian markets open in a few hours." Thompson ran a hand through his silver hair. "And Brooks? Where do we stand with her?" Shannon Peters, who had flown back from Baltimore on the corporate jet specifically for this emergency session, straightened in her chair. "Heather Brooks has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Her union rep is already involved. Preliminary review of her personnel file shows 2 previous customer complaints involving passengers of color, though nothing that rose to this level of severity." "Jesus," Thompson muttered. "And the Washington family? What do they want?" That's the thing, Peters replied carefully. They're not asking for what we expected. Dr. Washington isn't seeking financial compensation, at least not primarily. He wants systemic changes to how we train our staff on medical accommodations and bias awareness. He's also apparently on the FAA Medical Advisory Committee, added James Morton, Atlas's chief legal counsel. That gives him significant leverage and credibility in making demands related to medical accommodation policies. Thompson stopped pacing. He's on the committee that helps write the regulations we follow. Yes, Morton confirmed. And his wife is a corporate attorney with Fisher and Phillips. They're not just sympathetic victims, they're sophisticated professionals who understand exactly how to navigate this situation for maximum impact. They're coming here, Peters interjected. I've arranged for the Washington family to fly to Dallas tomorrow morning. On American Airlines, at their request. Dr. Washington has agreed to meet with you personally to discuss terms for resolution. Thompson nodded slowly, processing this information. And if we don't meet their demands? Morton cleared his throat uncomfortably. Based on my preliminary analysis, we're looking at potential litigation under the Air Carrier Access Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, possibly even civil rights violations if racial discrimination can be demonstrated. The financial exposure could be significant, but the reputational damage. He trailed off meaningfully. I get it, Thompson snapped, resuming his pacing. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow afternoon. And get me everything we have on Dr. Washington and his family. I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with. As the crisis team dispersed to prepare for the following day's confrontation, the internal investigation into Heather Brooks's conduct was already yielding troubling results. Ryan Cooper, the flight attendant who had attempted to intervene during the incident, sat in a small conference room with Atlas's head of flight attendant training and an HR representative. I tried to de-escalate the situation, Ryan explained, his expression troubled. But Heather pulled rank. She has a pattern of applying extra scrutiny to certain passengers. Certain passengers, the HR representative prompted. Ryan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Passengers who don't fit her image of what first-class travelers should look like. Especially minorities, regardless of how well-dressed or professional they appear. Has she made explicit statements to this effect? The training director asked. Not in those exact words, Ryan admitted. But among crew, there's an understanding that Heather is thorough with certain types of passengers. She calls it her security instinct, but the pattern is obvious to anyone paying attention. As Ryan's testimony was transcribed and added to the growing file of evidence, similar accounts began emerging from other Atlas employees. Flight attendants from different crews, gate agents who had worked with Brooks, even baggage handlers who had observed her interactions with passengers, all painted a picture of a senior employee whose biases had been tolerated, overlooked, or rationalized away for years. Meanwhile, the Washington family prepared for their own confrontation with Atlas leadership. In their hotel suite, Malcolm reviewed notes with Tanya, outlining the specific policy changes they would demand during tomorrow's meeting. Medical documentation verification should happen once, at check-in, Malcolm stated. Not repeatedly throughout the boarding process. Tanya nodded, typing his points into a formal document. And standardized training on disability accommodations for all customer-facing staff, with specific modules addressing implicit bias in medical contexts. Their preparation was interrupted by Tanya's phone buzzing with a news alert. Malcolm, she said, her voice tight. You need to see this. She turned her screen to show him a breaking news headline, exclusive, 3 more families come forward with similar discrimination claims against Atlas Airlines. The story featured accounts from other minority families who had experienced challenging interactions while traveling with medical necessities, a Latino family whose child's diabetes supplies had been excessively scrutinized, a Muslim woman questioned about her prescription pain medication, an elderly Asian man delayed because of confusion over his heart medication. It was never just about us, Malcolm said quietly. It never is, Tanya replied, squeezing his hand. The following afternoon, the Washington family was escorted through the imposing glass headquarters of Atlas Airlines. Zoe, now fully recovered from her medical scare but wide-eyed at the corporate environment, held tightly to Malcolm's hand as they were led to a spacious conference room on the executive floor. Bradley Thompson rose to greet them, his practiced corporate smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington, thank you for coming. I want to personally express my deepest apologies for what happened to your family." Malcolm nodded acknowledgement but did not return the smile. "Mr. Thompson, we appreciate the opportunity to address this situation directly with you." As they settled around the conference table, Thompson attempted to take control of the narrative. "Before we begin, I want to assure you that the employee in question has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and we're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your family's distress and inconvenience." "Mr. Thompson," Tanya interjected smoothly, her legal training evident, "we're not here primarily to discuss compensation. We're here to address the systemic issues that allowed this incident to occur." Thompson's smile flickered slightly. "Of course, and Atlas Airlines is committed to reviewing our policies." "With respect," Malcolm interrupted, "vague commitments to review policies aren't sufficient. We have specific concerns that require specific remedies." He opened a folder containing printouts of the viral videos, each showing different angles of the confrontation aboard the aircraft. "Before we proceed, I'd like to ensure you've personally viewed the complete footage of what transpired." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "I've been briefed on the incident." "That's not what I asked," Malcolm stated firmly. "Have you, personally, watched the complete footage showing your employee destroying my daughter's medication after reviewing our complete and proper documentation?" The room fell silent. Thompson hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "I've seen clips, but not the complete footage." Malcolm nodded to Tanya, who connected her laptop to the conference room's display system. "Then I believe we should begin there. Because understanding exactly what happened is essential to preventing its recurrence." The room darkened as the video began to play, a composite of 3 passenger recordings showing the complete interaction from different angles. The footage was more damning than Thompson had been led to believe. Heather Brooks's dismissive tone, her disregard for the family's documentation, her aggressive confiscation of the medication, and most disturbing, the slight smirk visible on her face as the bottle shattered, all captured in high definition. As the lights came back up, Thompson's expression had transformed from corporate detachment to genuine shock. I had not seen that level of. That was completely unacceptable." "Yes, it was," Malcolm agreed quietly. "Now imagine that was your child's medication being destroyed while you watched helplessly." Zoe, who had been quietly coloring in a book Tanya had brought for her, looked up at the mention of the incident. Seeing her innocent face seemed to affect Thompson deeply, a humanizing element that corporate briefings and legal summaries had failed to convey. "Dr. Washington," Thompson said, his tone markedly different, "what specifically would you like Atlas Airlines to do?" For the next 2 hours, Malcolm and Tanya presented their comprehensive proposal for reform, a complete overhaul of staff training on medical accommodations, a new verification system to prevent repeated questioning of passengers with documented medical needs, implicit bias training specifically addressing medical discrimination, the establishment of an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and a public commitment to these changes. Thompson, initially defensive, became increasingly engaged as the meeting progressed. The Washington family wasn't simply demanding accountability for a single incident, they were offering Atlas Airlines an opportunity to become an industry leader in accessible and equitable air travel. These changes would require significant investment, Thompson noted as they concluded their presentation. "Yes," Tanya acknowledged. "But considerably less than the cost of class action litigation, which is already organizing based on the other cases that have come forward. And immeasurably less than the continued cost to your reputation if this issue isn't addressed meaningfully." Thompson studied them thoughtfully. "You know, most people in your position would be focused on extracting the maximum financial settlement possible." Malcolm glanced at Zoe, who had fallen asleep in her chair after the long, emotionally exhausting day. Mr. Thompson, I spend my professional life performing surgeries that give children second chances. Sometimes the most important work isn't the dramatic procedure itself. It's the careful, methodical changes to the system that prevent the need for emergency interventions in the first place. Thompson followed his gaze to the sleeping child. Something in his expression softened, perhaps recognition of the universal desire of parents to protect their children, to make the world safer for them. Dr. Washington, he said finally, I believe we have the foundation for an agreement. 1 week later, the Washington family finally arrived in San Francisco. Their journey west had taken a dramatically different path than they had planned, but as their new flight, on a different airline, began its descent toward San Francisco International Airport, Malcolm felt a sense of accomplishment that transcended the original purpose of their trip. Beside him, Zoe pressed her face against the window, eyes wide with excitement. Daddy, look! Is that it? Is that the Golden Gate Bridge? Not yet, sunshine, he replied with a smile. But we'll see it soon. The in-flight magazine in the seat pocket featured a breaking news sidebar: Atlas Airlines announces comprehensive overhaul of medical accommodation policies. The brief article mentioned an incident involving a pediatric passenger, but did not name the Washington family directly, one of the terms of their agreement with the airline. The Harrison Award ceremony, originally scheduled for the previous weekend, had been rearranged to accommodate the Washingtons' delayed arrival. As Malcolm stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, accepting the prestigious recognition for his contributions to pediatric neurosurgery, he departed from his prepared remarks. Medical innovation isn't just about developing new surgical techniques, he told the assembled luminaries of his field. It's about creating systems where every patient has equal access to care, where every family's medical needs are respected, where biases don't determine outcomes. Without explicitly mentioning the incident, Malcolm shared the broader lessons he had drawn from the past week's experiences. Many in the audience had seen the viral videos and news coverage, they understood the subtext of his speech. As physicians, we take an oath to do no harm, he continued. But non-maleficence isn't just about avoiding technical errors in the operating room. It's about dismantling systems that cause harm through bias, dismissal, and disrespect. It's about recognizing that a surgeon's duty extends beyond the confines of the hospital walls. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for his medical achievements, but for his willingness to use his position to advocate for systematic change. Back in their hotel suite that evening, Tanya scrolled through news updates on her tablet while Malcolm helped Zoe prepare for bed. The story's not going away, Tanya observed. CNN is running a special report tomorrow on discrimination in air travel. They've interviewed 3 other families with similar experiences. Malcolm nodded, unsurprised. Their incident had cracked open a conversation that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Any word on Brooks? Terminated yesterday, Tanya confirmed. Atlas issued a statement calling her actions completely inconsistent with our values and protocols. They're not naming her publicly, but industry sources confirmed it. The decision to terminate Heather Brooks had not been Malcolm and Tanya's primary demand, they had focused instead on systemic changes rather than individual punishment, but it represented Atlas's recognition of the severity of the incident. More significant was the announcement that had come earlier that day: Atlas Airlines was launching a comprehensive training program developed in consultation with medical and civil rights experts, including input from Malcolm himself. The Patient Dignity Protocol would establish new standards for verifying and accommodating passengers with medical needs, with specific attention to eliminating bias in how those accommodations were implemented. While Zoe slept, Malcolm received an unexpected call from Ryan Cooper, the flight attendant who had attempted to intervene during the incident. Dr. Washington, I hope I'm not disturbing you, Ryan began hesitantly. I just wanted you to know that a lot of us at Atlas are grateful for how you've handled this situation. Things needed to change. Thank you for saying that, Ryan, Malcolm replied. And thank you for trying to help us that day on the plane. I should have done more, Ryan admitted. But there's an unwritten culture that you don't question senior crew members in front of passengers, even when they're clearly wrong. That's exactly the kind of cultural issue we're trying to address, Malcolm noted. Ryan hesitated, then continued, I want you to know that Brooks wasn't just an isolated bad apple. There's been an atmosphere where certain passengers get extra scrutiny, especially in first class. Most of us don't agree with it, but speaking up has consequences for your career. Has that been your experience personally? Malcolm asked. Let's just say I've been passed over for senior positions despite perfect performance reviews, Ryan replied carefully. Being gay and Latino in this industry means I already stand out. Adding troublemaker to that doesn't help my advancement prospects. The conversation provided Malcolm with valuable insights into the internal culture that had enabled Heather's behavior, insights he would incorporate into his ongoing consultations with Atlas's training department. The following morning brought another development. The Federal Aviation Administration announced it would be reviewing regulations regarding medical accommodations across all domestic airlines, specifically citing recent incidents that had raised concerns about consistent application of existing guidelines. Your FAA committee position made a difference, Tanya observed as they prepared for a day of sightseeing with Zoe. They couldn't ignore this when one of their own advisors was directly affected. Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. It shouldn't take someone with my credentials to make them pay attention, but I'll use whatever leverage we have to push for change. As they crossed the Golden Gate Bridge later that day, Zoe bouncing excitedly between them, Malcolm reflected on the unexpected journey their family vacation had become. What had begun as a traumatic incident of discrimination had transformed into an opportunity for meaningful change, not just for their family, but potentially for thousands of travelers with medical conditions. The media coverage continued to expand, with medical organizations, disability rights advocates, and civil rights groups all weighing in on the broader implications of the Washington family's experience. What might have been dismissed as an isolated incident was now being recognized as part of a pattern that required systematic attention. 6 months later, Malcolm stood at a podium again, this time addressing the National Conference on Aviation Customer Service in Chicago. His keynote speech introduced what was now being called the Washington Protocol for passengers with medical needs, a standardized, dignity-preserving approach to verifying and accommodating medical necessities during air travel. The success of these protocols depends not just on their technical implementation, Malcolm explained to the assembled airline industry representatives, but on the recognition that every traveler deserves equal treatment, equal respect, and equal presumption of legitimacy when presenting medical documentation. In the audience, Shannon Peters, now promoted to Executive Vice President of Customer Experience at Atlas Airlines, nodded in agreement. The company that had initially sought to minimize the incident had ultimately embraced the opportunity for industry leadership, implementing reforms that went beyond the Washington family's original demands. The most meaningful test of these changes came 3 months later, when the Washington family boarded another flight, this time on Atlas Airlines, at the company's invitation, to demonstrate their new procedures firsthand. As they settled into their seats, a flight attendant approached with a tablet. Dr. Washington, I see from our system that your daughter has a medical accommodation on file. No need to show documentation again, it's already verified in our database. I just wanted to check if there's anything specific you need from our crew during the flight. The contrast with their previous experience was striking, professional, respectful, efficient. No suspicion, no extra scrutiny, no power dynamics at play. Thank you, Malcolm replied, noticing Zoe's relieved smile. Just access to refrigeration for this medication, which should already be noted in the system. It is indeed, the attendant confirmed, tapping the tablet. I've marked your seats for priority service, and the captain has been notified of a passenger with medical needs, as per protocol. As the flight proceeded smoothly, Zoe leaned over to Malcolm. Daddy, did you fix it? Like you fix kids' brains? Malcolm smiled, touched by his daughter's simple framing of the complex changes they had helped initiate. I think we helped fix a small part of a big problem, sunshine. There's still a lot of work to do. The healing had begun, not just for Zoe, who no longer showed anxiety when boarding planes, but for a system that had long overlooked the experiences of passengers who didn't fit the presumed norm. It was a reminder that even the most entrenched systems could be changed when confronted with determined, strategic advocacy. Sometimes, Malcolm had told a reporter recently, the most important surgery isn't the one performed in the operating room. It's the one that reforms the system itself, making it work better for everyone who enters it. 18 months after the incident that had unexpectedly changed their lives, Dr. Malcolm Washington stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, facing an audience of airline executives, federal regulators, medical professionals, and disability rights advocates. As the keynote speaker for the first national conference on inclusive air travel, he represented the intersection of medicine, civil rights, and corporate accountability that had become his unexpected secondary career. When my daughter's medication was destroyed that day, Malcolm began, his deep voice carrying throughout the hushed room, I had no intention of becoming an advocate for systemic change in the airline industry. I was simply a father protecting his child, a doctor recognizing a dangerous medical situation, and a black professional familiar with the extra scrutiny that comes with existing in spaces not designed with us in mind. The audience, numbering over 500 industry leaders, listened with rapt attention. In the front row sat Zoe, now 10 years old, alongside Tanya, who had taken a sabbatical from her legal practice to help expand what had become known industry-wide as the Washington Protocol. Today, 18 months later, I'm proud to report that this protocol has been implemented by 17 major airlines, representing over 70% of domestic air traffic in the United States, Malcolm continued, gesturing toward a slide showing implementation statistics. And the preliminary data is remarkable. The screen behind him displayed a graph illustrating a 63% reduction in medical accommodation complaints, a 47% decrease in disability-related discrimination reports, and an 82% improvement in passenger satisfaction scores among travelers with medical conditions. These aren't just numbers, Malcolm emphasized. Each percentage point represents real families who could focus on their journeys rather than defending their right to necessary medication or medical equipment. Each data point represents dignity preserved, anxiety prevented, and equal treatment provided. In the audience, Shannon Peters, now president of passenger experience at Atlas Airlines, nodded in agreement. Her promotion had come after she championed the Washington Protocol within the company, transforming Atlas from a corporate villain in the initial viral videos to an industry leader in inclusive travel practices. The most powerful aspect of these changes, Malcolm continued, has been the active participation of airline employees in refining and improving these protocols. The frontline staff who interact with passengers daily have provided invaluable insights that no consultant or executive could have anticipated. He gestured toward a table where Ryan Cooper sat alongside other flight attendants who had become advocates within their respective airlines. Ryan had been promoted to training director for Atlas's completely redesigned medical accommodation program, his previously overlooked potential now recognized and valued. But our work isn't finished, Malcolm cautioned, transitioning to the forward-looking portion of his address. Today, we're announcing the next phase of the Washington Initiative, a comprehensive educational program designed by and for children with medical conditions. Zoe stood up at this point, joining her father on stage with poised confidence that belied her young age. Gone was the frightened child whose medication had been destroyed in a moment of casual cruelty. In her place stood a composed young advocate, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Medical Kids Rock," beneath her neat blazer. "Hi everyone," she began, her voice clear despite the enormous audience. "My name is Zoe Washington, and I have epilepsy. That means sometimes my brain has too much electrical activity, which can cause seizures if I don't take my medicine." The audience listened intently as Zoe explained in child-friendly language the basics of her condition and how it affected her daily life, including travel. "My dad and I made videos to help flight attendants understand what kids like me need," she continued proudly. "And we're making videos for kids like me too, so we know what to expect when we fly and don't feel scared." The educational program they had developed included age-appropriate materials for children with various medical conditions, helping them understand their rights during travel and providing practical guidance for navigating security screenings and in-flight situations. Equally important were the training materials developed for airline staff, featuring actual children explaining their conditions and needs in their own words. As Zoe returned to her seat to enthusiastic applause, Malcolm resumed his presentation. What began as a traumatic incident for our family has evolved into something none of us could have predicted, a fundamental reimagining of how we accommodate medical needs during air travel. The screens behind him displayed testimonials from families who had benefited from the new protocols, diverse in ethnicity, medical conditions, and geographic locations, but united in their appreciation for being treated with dignity and respect during their travels. The most significant lesson I've learned through this journey, Malcolm reflected, is that sustainable change requires more than righteous anger or public pressure. It requires constructive engagement, collaborative problem-solving, and a willingness to see beyond immediate grievances to identify underlying systemic issues. Following the conference, the Washington family boarded an Atlas Airlines flight bound for San Francisco, a deliberate choice to revisit the destination that had been the original goal of their interrupted journey 18 months earlier. This time, their experience was dramatically different from that fateful day. As they settled into their first-class seats, the difference in their experience was immediately apparent. The flight attendant who greeted them consulted a tablet, then nodded with recognition. "Dr. Washington, I see you've registered medical accommodations for your daughter Zoe. Everything is already verified in our system. Would you prefer that we check in with you during the flight, or would you rather signal if you need assistance?" The simple question, offering autonomy rather than imposing surveillance, embodied the core philosophy of the Washington Protocol, respecting the dignity and agency of passengers with medical conditions. "We'll let you know if we need anything," Malcolm replied with an appreciative smile. "Thank you." As the plane taxied for takeoff, Zoe looked out the window, excitement replacing the anxiety that had previously accompanied air travel. "Dad, remember when you said fixing big problems takes longer than fixing brains?" Malcolm nodded, curious where his perceptive daughter was going with this observation. "I think you were wrong," she said with the beautiful directness of childhood. "You fixed the airplane problem faster than Joey Miller's brain tumor." Malcolm laughed, genuinely delighted by her perspective. "Maybe you're right, sunshine. Sometimes systems can change more quickly than we expect, when the right people decide to change them." The flight proceeded smoothly, a stark contrast to their traumatic experience 18 months earlier. When Zoe needed her medication mid-flight, the process was routine, dignified, and unremarkable, exactly as it should be. As they crossed over the Golden Gate Bridge the following morning, Malcolm reflected on the complex journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a shocking incident of discrimination had transformed into an opportunity to create lasting change that extended far beyond their family. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Tanya asked, linking her arm through his as they watched Zoe run ahead on the bridge walkway, her purple backpack bouncing with each step. "I was just thinking about the ripples," Malcolm replied. "How one moment of standing our ground created waves we never could have predicted." Tanya nodded. "In the operating room, you change one life at a time. But this," she gestured broadly, encompassing more than just the scenic view, "this changes countless lives, most of whom we'll never even meet." "That's the most powerful surgery of all," Malcolm said quietly. "Operating on the system itself." As the California sun illuminated the iconic Red Bridge, Zoe called excitedly for her parents to join her at the viewing area. The Washington family gathered together, taking in the panoramic vista of San Francisco Bay, the destination they had originally planned to enjoy 18 months ago, now infused with deeper meaning and purpose. The sight of Zoe's unrestrained joy, free from the anxiety and trauma that had once shadowed her travel experiences, was the most meaningful victory of all. She was not just a beneficiary of the changes they had fought for, she had become an active participant in creating them, finding her voice and purpose in the process. Sometimes, Malcolm thought as he watched his daughter point excitedly toward Alcatraz Island in the distance, the most powerful legacy we leave isn't what we build for ourselves, but what we transform for others. Do you believe everyone has the power to create systemic change like the Washington family did? Comment below with your thoughts on standing up against discrimination. Hit the like button if you've ever witnessed someone using their position to make things better for others who don't have the same privilege. Subscribe to hear more inspiring stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that speaking up matters, even when it feels impossible. Thank you for joining me for this powerful journey. I'm grateful for each of you who takes these lessons to heart. This story reminds us that dignity isn't a privilege but a right that sometimes must be defended with unwavering resolve. Dr. Washington's response teaches us that effective advocacy isn't just about righteous anger, but strategic action. By leveraging his credentials and position instead of just expressing outrage, he created lasting change that benefited countless others facing similar discrimination. The most powerful transformation often happens when we refuse to accept individual compensation and instead demand systemic reform. When faced with injustice, we can choose between private resolution or public accountability that prevents future harm. The Washington family shows us that our greatest impact comes not from fighting isolated incidents, but by addressing the underlying systems that allow discrimination to flourish. This story also highlights how privilege should be used responsibly. Dr. Washington's medical credentials and committee position gave him leverage that many victims of discrimination lack. True allies recognize their advantage and use it to amplify marginalized voices rather than simply protecting themselves. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to stop it? Comment below with your experience. If you've ever had to advocate for yourself or a loved one in a medical setting, hit that like button to show solidarity with families like the Washingtons. Subscribe for more powerful stories about everyday heroes standing against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs reminding that one person really can create meaningful change when they refuse to back down from what's right. Thank you for joining this important conversation. Remember, the most powerful advocacy often comes from unexpected moments of courage when we simply say, "No, this isn't acceptable."